I can't even comprehend how it must be to have the lucky set of identities that are featured in every single movie. I was 22 when I first saw someone exactly like me in the media for the very first time. I had heard about failure to communicate over Tumblr, and it was advertised as a space opera similar to Star Trek. And it features an autistic main character. As I read it, it also turned out that the main character was bisexual, just like me. Of course, I love Locktump in all of its gay glory. But recently, I also reread an old book by my favorite author, Scott Westerfeld. And to my surprise, it did not just feature a very beautiful romance between two women, but also several disabled characters. So naturally, I hyperfixated on it. Sadly, it hardly has any fandom. This book actually inspired me to make this video because I read 3 of this underrated Sapphic space operas by now. They're all a bit more subtle than Locktump, but they're all very much canonically queer. And also they're not all lesbians, but bisexual women too. They're not as, how do I say this? I genuinely don't mean this as smattering Locktump, because it takes a lot of skill to make something this accessible and easy and fun to read. But there are not all as easy to read and get into as these books, but they're worth the trouble. Background footage is me colorizing a drawing of Hurt and Rana from Scott Westerfeld's book. Hurt is the cyborg woman, and Rana is the smaller one, and I drew them in formal wear because it's just a fun exercise to draw. It has no deeper meaning.
After that, I also added a recording of me colorizing a drawing of Kiri and Sandri from Failure to Communicate.
A memory called Empire. Arkady Martine. I found out about this on Tumblr and decided to read it because it sounded quite similar to Babylon 5, which I love. I knew it was queer too, but not how it was. As a non-native speaker, I had a bit of trouble reading it because of its quite sophisticated language and highbrow concepts. But it was also quite fun to read it. It starts out as our protagonist, Mahit Dismare, the newly appointed ambassador to the Teixkalanli Empire, leaves her home station, Nusel, and first sets foot on the planet where the Teixkalanli Empire has its main seat. She doesn't quite know why she is called there, just that something happened with her predecessor, and then it turns out that he was murdered. The officials say that he just had an allergic reaction to something, but it's quite a suspicious circumstances. She then also meets her new assistant 3 Sigras and her friend 12 Asilia, who both help her. They're both native Teixkalanli people, and 3 Sigras works as a cultural liaison to Mahit, but also has more or less a similar role to the ambassador's attaches in Babylon 5. They immediately have a quite interesting chemistry with playfully teasing each other and things that could be interpreted as flirting but are not quite as obvious enough to know for sure. But for most of the book, I wasn't even sure if it would go in this direction. Mahit starts an investigation on her own, and turns out Iskander, her predecessor, was somehow involved with the succession crisis of the Teixkalan emperor. Because the situation is that the current Teixkalan emperor, the Sixth Direction, is quite old and ill and will die very soon, and it's not clear who will be his successor. So, of course, there is quite a political, what's the English word for this? when there's quite a power struggle between different kinds of factions in the empire. What makes all of this even more complicated is that Liesel has a technology named Imago, which works quite similar to the Trill symbiont in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, only that it's technology and not a worm. And Mahit was supposed to get the one from Yiskandar, but because Yiskandar died on the planet and never even got back to Lysa, she only has one that is quite outdated and also doesn't properly links with her, which gives her a lot of trouble. During her investigation, she gets involved more and more with the political struggles and also at some point gets cornered by the powerful and secretive 19 Atze, who is a very high-ranking politician, and it's relatively unclear what her motives are. We only know that she was linked to Yiskandar in some way, but also not if she plans anything that's good for Liesel or not, or what she plans at all. Her interest in Mahit also reads as somewhat romantic, but it's also not clear if this is because she was romantically involved with Yiskandar or if it's because of Mahit herself. The characters and their identity struggle are quite interesting and feel real in how they react to all of this. They are quite shaped by their cultures, and the book really delves deep into this. Mahit is so overwhelmed, but also quite dutiful towards her home station. Free Seagrass is quite mischievous and smart, but also, despite being fascinated with the culture of people outside the empire, it's a different thing to directly interact with these people instead of just reading about them. The world building is amazing. It feels so real and deep, and it's full of layers. Like for example, even just the titles the Teixkalandi people use to describe themselves. They are not based on English, but sound kind of Mayan or Aztec-like Ixtlanatl for scientists. It's just a nice touch. There are so many interesting thoughts about culture and identity and how this intersects, and also quite a lot about language, as the Teixkalan people use quite a lot of poems and language skills to do their politics. It's written in a poetic way and feels almost academic in how deep it goes into all of these aspects. What I also found quite interesting and could relate to a lot as a German who deals a lot with American media and American people over the internet, because most of my fandoms are from there, was how Teixkalan is an empire that expands through conquering planets. Most of its power comes through cultural media. Mahit, for example, studied Teixkalan media even before she arrived on the planet, not just because she's ambassador, but because it was interesting for her, and she even dreamed of belonging to them in the same way I see a lot of people from other countries dream of living in the US because all their favorite media takes place there. The Teixkalandi people also have this view that the universe revolves around them, and in a sense they are right, because all of the galaxy is focused on their media, their culture, and this reminded me a lot of how American people on the internet are very self-centered in the way that they just don't need to be aware about other cultures because their culture is the most prevalent one. And on contrast, me as a German or Mahit as someone from Liesel is very aware that the universe doesn't revolve around their culture. Culturally, the Teixkalani people are quite different from the US, though. For one thing, they are all brown, they are Latino or indigenous, and they also don't have gendered preferences or roles at all, and they don't have homophobia at all, too. That was quite refreshing to read, because there was no angst at all from Free Seagrass or Mahit about being attracted to another woman, or even just being confused about why they are attracted to a woman and not a man. It just happened, and they are not even the only queer people. I can't go quite into detail about this because it's a plot point that happens quite late, but it also turns out that Iskander was bisexual, and even the emperor himself, Sixth Direction, was either gay or bisexual. Just like the other two books, this has a very deep focus on politics, and I enjoy this. I love when sci-fi goes deep into politics. It feels even more like Babylon 5 than the Rising Empire, just without the sexism Babylon 5 sadly had, especially towards the Len. Mahit and Tree Seagrass's romance is so interesting to see unfold. They flirt all the time, but mostly they don't even notice it. For most of the book, I couldn't even believe it was really happening because I read so many books where I interpreted something like this as romantic and queer, and then it didn't go there. But in this book, it actually does go there. And I'm very curious to see what happens in the follow-up book, because this is a series.
Ready to start the conquest of spaces, expanding between you and me. Come with the night, the science of fighting the forces of gravity.
The Rising Empire and The Killing of Worlds by Scott Westerfeld.
Do you notice she breasted boobily down the stairs, male authors? Well, Scott Westerfeld is the opposite of that. This book is the only non-own voices book on this list, as far as I know. But apart from like 3 or so very small slip-ups in an accusatory sentence, you won't notice that. Already in his dystopian Ugly series, where my name comes from, he captured the very codependent, jealous, homoerotic, though sadly in this book it sadly isn't canon, like canon romance, it isn't one, but it felt so accurate, and the descriptions of female body insecurity also felt very, very true and accurate, so that me and many other people wondered how the hell a 60-year-old male author managed to get that so right. Here in The Rising Empire, he touchingly describes the romance between a female super soldier who was meant to mature on the planet and a downtrodden, insecure, neurodivergent military worker who are both female and meant to be enemies. Or was it actually in The Killing of Worlds? The thing is, these books are more or less one book in truth, and in Germany they are published as one book, but originally in the US they are published as 2 books, so I'm not sure where exactly between these 2 books the romance of these 2 starts. Because this book has about 14 different POVs, 6 of which are important, and Rana and Hirt are the 2 women this romance will take place between. Some of these 6 important, but they don't directly start at the beginning of the book. Hirt's POV starts about like a third of the book, and Rana's starts slightly earlier than the middle. Well, why should I read this then, you might ask? Because the world building and the other POVs are so damn interesting. It starts right in a hostage situation between the Empire and the Riksrumen. The Emperor managed to conquer death, so that now high-ranking people or people who did special accomplishments like fallen soldiers get resurrected, and they make up the upper class of the Empire. And the Rigs are cyborgs who literally worship machines. Their religion is to spread planetary AE, so-called compound minds, and they also attempt this on the planet this takes place, which is originally under Empire control. And yes, the Rigs are all women, and they manage to avoid every single annoying cliche about an all-woman race. They are not abundantly sexy, they're not more emotional, they don't need men to save them. They're just like the Borg, but slightly lesser aggressive. closest thing to a main character this book has is Lawrence I, captain of an important spaceship who had the really bad luck to be in orbit around the planet as this situation started. He's very morally upstanding, calm, and a tactical genius, but he's not your standard Kirk or Sheridan. For one thing, he is described as a lanky black man. He also lost both legs and his left arm in a very traumatic war captivity where he was tortured. As far as I can tell, as an able-bodied person, this is dealt with quite well. It's not the focus of his story, but he does have phantom pain. He does have some issues with his protheses because they never quite replace his original limbs, even if they can do more things than protheses can do today, because science fiction. They need maintenance, and there are some situations where he can't or don't want to wear them. There also is a very beautiful implied sex scene where he is worried that his body is disgusting and he's too broken to be desirable, and his love interest reassures him that he's beautiful. Another important character is Nara Oxam, a senator who finds herself in direct opposition to the rising emperor. I'm not quite sure if she counts as neurodivergent representation, because she's a telepath, which is obviously not real, but her symptoms of being overwhelmed with too many people and needing breaks from people and having meltdowns when that can't happen, and needing to take medication, and even that she spent quite a lot of time in a psych ward, just reminds me at my autism and my mental illness. There also is First Officer Catherine Hobbs, who is beauty surged to hell and back in a prelude to Uglies, and it doesn't affect the plot at all. Rick's Commando Hurt, and I will pronounce her name Hurt, even if it's written as H_RD, because my headcanon is that in Rick's language, something like an underscore, which is important for computer languages, might have its own vowel, and this vowel sounds similar to an E. And Hurt even uses this name as a cover name later in the book. She was one of the Rick's women who started the attack and managed to survive, and now she is alone for the first time in her life, other than being guided by her god, which is the newly awakened AE compound mind of the planet. It's quite fascinating to witness her coming into her own. Such a sucker for living weapon characters discovering themselves. She seeks out Rana Hata as a part of her plan. Rana leads a very unhappy life, being a school dropout who's too physically weak and has too slow reflexes to work in a combat role, and she could only join the militia because she has a talent for estimating the behavior of large groups of objects, like, for example, asteroids or things like that, which is quite useful for the militia. The first two scenes between these two are quite creepy and intense, but after the enemies to Laura's part, they genuinely fell in love, and it's quite tender and respectful. Hurt is just so lonely without her comrades, and Rana is valued for the first time in her life and truly helped with her depression. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention the most important part. Rana is very nervous and insecure because of her depression. The Empire does nothing to cure her because they worry that her special skills they need so much might go away if they cure her depression. There are no explicit sex scenes between these two, sadly, but there are very steaming descriptions of how fascinated by their alien bodies they are, and I filled the gaps with fan fiction and fan art. I also really love how every description of Hurt shows her as this tall, muscular, very angular and sharp-faced, brutal-looking woman, but she's never described as undesirable because of that. Rana even calls her beautiful multiple times. Rana is bisexual, as she had a few rather unfulfilling encounters with men before she met Herod. Herod likely is a lesbian, since all of her species are women. And it's also mentioned once that she had sex before she met Rana, which is kind of interesting and a nice subversion of the all machine aliens are asexual trope. Later in the book, there is a scene where you might think that it goes into harmful territory, but I can't say more because then I would spoiler you, but it's not. Just trust me on this one, it's not. It gets resolved in a good way. Generally, the book isn't an easy read because of its very technological language and complex ideas. The many point of views make a very vivid picture of this world, but in the beginning they are also disorienting and somewhat exhausting. Also, it contains some heavy themes, and as I try to read this the first time, I didn't even finish it because I was in a quite bad place at this time, and it was just too dark for me back then. But it has also so many unique and creative world-building aspects. I love the philosophical touches too. The space politics kind of remind me on Babylon 5, just that it's much more diverse. And the space battles feel like from The Expanse in the sense that they are very grounded in physics and what you could actually do with spacefaring technology instead of just copying ship battles, but in space. Characters are amazing. They feel very real. I mean, there's a reason why I make fan art and fan fiction for this book. It's a very underrated book. Give it a try.
I don't know how to fill the space. The invitations on the page open up my ribcage.
Failure to Communicate by Kaia Sonderby. I hope I pronounced this name correctly. I found this over Tumblr a few years ago and was advertised as a space opera written by an autistic person about an autistic woman. I am autistic, and the little representation I ever got was either a character that was accidentally written as autistic, like Data from Star Trek, or very inaccurate, insulting representation, like a typical or the good doctor, and also never female, and even rarer queer or a person of color. I mostly read this on vacation to Lake Garda in Italy. Sometimes it was hard to get through because the social difficulties and other worries of the protagonist Sandri Corellel were just too similar to my own, and it hurt reading this. This was also the very first time that I saw someone like me in a book. Sandri even is poly and bisexual like me. She's the linguistics and first contact expert on a spaceship. The ship loosely works for them, and humans are in a federation-like society with other planets in this universe, just like in Star Trek. Sandri was born to parents who gave in to the trend at the time to not have genetically engineered children, and who then mistreated her and tried to force her to be normal. She has a lot of trauma from this, but she found her place on the ship as the captain realized that her skills in navigating societies basically from the outside is very useful to understand alien societies. It has a very Star Trek The Next Generation-like vibe. The conflict begins when Sandri is called to try to get the very xenophobic Amarilli to join the Federation. This gets even more urgent as the Amarilli managed to build technology the conquering enemies of the Alliance wants to have too. So yeah, space politics, and it's very fascinating to follow. The world building feels real too and fitting for the characters. I love seeing Sandri dissect culture and language in this very specific way she does. The writing style is very precise and unique in a way I can't describe any better than being clearly informed by the autism of the author. There's a romance side plot between Sandri, the male engineer diver, and the female hacker Kiri. There's no jealousy at all. The poly dynamic just develops between them. As this is a series of books, the romance isn't finished by the end of this book, but continues in all parts, and so this is a slow burn. Also, it isn't focus of the books, but it's clearly there. Sandri's romance with Diver is slightly faster than her romance with Kiri, simply because she knows him better. So this is the most understated Sapphic romance of these 3 books, but it's very much there, and it's very much informed by Sandri's bisexuality. Also, bisexuality is contradictory to what certain people say, not just the attraction of women to other women, but to all genders. I love their dynamic with each other, how supportive they are, and how they try their best to help each other with their work on the spaceship. Also, both Diver and Kiri are very supportive and understanding of Sandri. I just love so much how Diver even nicknames Sandri Fireball. It's a cliche that autistic people don't have emotions. We most of the time have very strong emotions. We just might struggle to show them in a way that neurotypicals understand, or we get labeled as too intense and too emotional, and then learn to suppress our emotions. So what neurotypicals often don't understand is that emotions make you very vulnerable, and if you are abused like autistic people sadly often are, you just don't want to show vulnerabilities. I also quite enjoy how this challenges the idea that all autistic people are aromantic and asexual. Aromantic and asexual autistic people do exist, but they are not like this because of their autism. They are like this because they are aromantic and asexual. It has nothing to do with each other. Sandri also is shown stimming, with if you don't know it, repetitive actions people do to calm themselves down. In Sandri's case, this is rubbing her fingers over pleasantly feeling surfaces, and she even has the inside of her her trouser pockets lined with fabric that makes her feel calm. It's just so neat to have this included. As a side note, there are also very interesting alien designs, like the six-legged, wait, I have to look up the name, Onkoa. I have no idea how to pronounce this. So they're like, they look like bears, but they have 6 legs. But there are also basically parrot people, which Sandri helped to establish the first contact, and her interactions with them are also very fun to read. But even the more humanoid aliens have quite interesting cultures and feel distinct. It's very likely very refreshing, and for me it was even healing to read this as an autistic person. But even if you're not autistic, this is quite a worthwhile read with its unique world building and unique protagonist. As I said, this is part of a series. The second is already out. The third book will come out somewhere in the future, but I don't really know when. I read the second book, Tone of Voice, too, and it's quite good, but I can't really say much about it without spoilering. I feel bad because I can't say more about this, because there absolutely is more to say, but I read this quite a while ago, and with its heavy topics, I just don't have the spoons to reread this right now. But I definitely wanted to include this because it's not as famous as it deserves to be.
I hope I made you interested in reading these books, because they are all great and they deserve to be much more well known than they are. I also linked the fan trailers I made for each of these in the notes. You probably don't want to watch fan trailers for this, because most people don't exactly like them, but if you are like me and actually quite enjoy fan trailers, I just leave the link. I will also link the fan art I used for this video, and I also made other fan art for all of these books you will find if you just Google the name with my social media handles. I often hear people say that there are no Sapphic science fiction books, and that's just not true, but I can understand why people say this, because they are quite hard to find. Quite often they either aren't advertised as being Sapphic, or they are just not advertised at all. So if you know even more of Sapphic science fiction books, please write it in the comments. Have fun reading!